Hi guys, today I'm showing off the piece of university work I've done. It's a level editor, so this is a group project for to create a game engine, and my individual task in that was to do a level editor. So obviously you can make levels in program without having to doing them, externally or type them out, which is obviously ridiculous. So this is the level editor when you first load it up. I'll just create a ground object so you can see. As I say, so to start with, obviously you can't see anything because there's no objects in the scene being rendered. So the UI here on the left was done using the ImGUI library, which is really good. They've got loads of example windows where you can virtually, see perfect examples of everything you want, and you can just cut out the pieces, type them in how you want them. So I've set this all up here. So to start with, we've got our creation our creation window, then you've got an editing window, and then there's a saving and a sort of going back to other scenes window. So if we start at the top, you can see I've created a ground object and I've got that as my active object. This is so that I can actively swap between which object I'm manipulating, which is obviously quite a key thing because otherwise you'd only be able to manipulate the object you created most recently. So I just create a few objects using these shortcuts here. So these shortcuts are just made for convenience, really. Obviously, if you're going to go further into development, you might consider making these buttons maybe the most frequently used objects or the last used objects, and possibly also having a list of all objects people can see. But you can create the same objects just by typing in, I think there's one called cone, just by typing in the names. And if I type cone, it will just create the same object there, you see. So if you type in an object that doesn't exist, like if I just put a random string of letters here, it doesn't, break the engine. It's checked for that, and it'll say it doesn't exist. Let's continue, which is good, obviously. You don't want it crashing when people accidentally type a name. So to manipulate an object, you just select whichever one you want to do, and you've got these buttons here for doing the X, Y, Z position, and a reset button, which resets it back to 0, 0, which is where they're created in the first place. So as well as the position, you can do the rotation, which is what I would say a fairly base function. What you actually input here in these text boxes is degrees. So because I mean most people operate in degrees, I thought no one's going to know exactly if they want to rotate it 45 degrees. They're not going to have to get out the calculator and put it in radians. So I've made it so that you put in 45. Yeah, I'll do 45, 45. Rotate, and then what the class does is it translates that into radians, it calculates it in radians, passes that to the object's transform component, and the transform component handles rotation in radians, so it takes that in, bam, you've rotated. When we save the file, it will be saved in radians so that when it's read in, it gets rotated correctly. So I'll just create a few more objects here to build a nice little scene, and we will load this up after I've done that. So as I said, you can create objects that haven't got buttons. I'm going to create a few nodes here. I'll just create four of them. One, two, oh, two, three, four. My list is getting longer because I had the active objects open. So if I just move these about, so we'll move one up here, one out here, one of them out here. I'll just move one of them back a bit. There you go. So these objects are actually used for navigation. So when you come down, you might have seen beneath the edit objects, we've got type. Now every object has to have a type. It's used by the load function to assign, a type of object. You know, a class. Is it a player? Is it a static object? So all objects by default are set as static, which is a good assumption to make, I think. But each scene must have a player, as it says here. If you don't add a player, you actually won't end up with a camera component in your in your engine anyway, which won't render anything, and you've got a whole heap of trouble there. So I'll select the cone that isn't rotated half into the ground, which I think is which is not this one, it's the other one, this one. I'll make this our player. I'll move him out of the way a bit. Actually, let's move him the other direction because they always face one way. So we make him our player, and I want to have a couple objects move around. So I'll create one more cube, and we'll just place him over here. So what I'll do is I'll set these two cubes. Oh, you can't see him now, I've taken him off the screen. I'll set these two cubes to be non-static, and what we'll see is when the level's saved, it will save it as a different type. And then when we load it up, actually, these cubes will navigate around using the four nodes I've set down. So let me just get the other cube. Here it is, non-static. And I have to set my nodes to actually be nodes, because although that's what they called, they, once again, like everything else, start as static objects. So once you're at this point and you've got a lovely, level that you're happy with, all that's left to do is save it. So you can do that just by, if we open this section down here, if I close everything else, open our nice little save map, type in any map name you want. So I'll call this, video map, and we'll press save. That will now create a file for us. We can't actually access that without changing the address in the engine anyway. So I'll just close this. I'm going to open up here we go. Let me drag this on screen. Right, so this is the levels folder in our assets folder, and we've got video map, which I've just created. So this is an array of all the objects we had in the scene. Each object has got a name, the model name, which will be used to assign its model, a rotation, a position, and a type. So static. These are our two non-static cubes, and you should see a couple of nodes here, 4 nodes, and a player somewhere in there. Here's the player. So, I mean, it's all pretty self-explanatory. The only thing is the rotations get a bit crazy because, as I said, it's in radians, so it gets saved in as this super long decimal string. But yeah, when that gets read in, it'll work fine, and the cone should be rotated exactly how it was. So if I open up the load JSON function, I think this is the most interesting function actually in this class because all the other functions, creating objects, rendering objects is done elsewhere, but this is the only time we ever save a file. So the way it works basically is we've got a vector of models which get added to as we create objects, and we iterate through it, and for each model we get its name, which let me pull this up here. We get its name, which is saved as a string. We get its position, which is a vector 3 for our XYZ position, which is saved on the transform component. So actually the transform component remembers everything as we edit it, and then when you come here to the end, we just have to access the model's transform component that you're talking about, and it'll hold the position in this case, and our rotation, which is a quaternion for WXYZ. That will get saved. And the last thing was the Boolean, which we assigned for static, non-static, player, node. And that's just an integer. And depending on the value, it'll assign that, which actually in the actual level file is just a string, but that's fine because when we read it in, it'll just read in the string. Whatever it is, it'll assign the relative object. So we just add that to our game objects, which is a JSON value data type. It's an array of data. So if I scroll up the top here, you'll see, oh, here it is, game objects. And each one of these is an entry in our array. The array closes at the end there, see? And then we create that in a file, add it to whatever the file's called. That's the name we typed in there. And then here we actually add the file we created to our map of levels. However, there's no way for the to actually edit it in the access it in the editor, sorry, without changing this. So I'll just quickly change this address. And what do we call the map? It's video map. So if I just put that in here, control save. If we run this now, we should be able to just press play. It'll load up our level. Here we go. And here we are. This is the cone I set as the player. Here's our rotated cone exactly as it was. And here are 2 dynamic cubes, our enemies, running about the map. Now you can't see the nodes because they've been set to not render because they're nodes and, well, they're for navigation. We don't want them rendering. Right. I finally found the hotkey for the options menu. So if I turn on render nodes, you can see here are the nodes I placed down, and they'll run between them. And I believe they run between them in the inverse order that I placed them, which is why they're doing a funny order, because I didn't spread them out in the order I created them. But yeah, you'll see here they'll just loop through this, and yeah, I mean, they'll keep going forever. But that's basically an example of the level editor. So obviously, if you've got more advanced models, maybe that you've created in Blender or Maya, you can load those in. It'll apply all the textures as you exported them, and yeah, it'll work quite fine. So yeah, that's a showcase of my level editor. Thank you for watching.